Jeff, Jim, and Carmela, part number 35. Just a little bit of inside information on my novel. A lot of times I record these in the morning, and I'm using a JVC camera that has a small viewer. And when I pull it up into my big screen, I can see where I've cut myself shaving and I have to start all over. And that's what I just did. I did this one earlier and did that. So that's just making it personal. I've been writing this story I've had the idea. I've got a lot of ideas for stories, but the problem that I've always had, if I'd had a word processor and a spell checker many, many years ago, I'm 81, and I have a lot of stories, but I cannot spell. And I know I've been making some grammatical errors, not bad ones, but if I put it into print, I would have someone to edit it. But I love writing, but if we had, in other words, when I was in the military, I used a rural typewriter, a manual typewriter. Thing weighed a ton, and I carried a dictionary around with me continuously because I always worked in an office and I had to write reports, but I couldn't spell. And my English was good enough until I could not make a lot of mistakes there. I'd always go back and edit. But anyway, now we have digital cameras and we have spell checkers and the whole 9 yards, but you still have to shave. So I'm just personalizing this. I hope you're enjoying the story. This is part 35. And I know that some of you all that are following the story, you're probably thinking, well, there's some things that don't make any sense. And you're absolutely correct, but that's what I meant for it to be. Because Jeff and Jim are brilliant. And Jim, you'll see, I explain that. So I continue. But that's keeping it personal. So as we continue, Jeff, Jim, and Carmela, part number 35. Several times Mehmet referred to Jim as Jeff, and the way he did this was unusual, as if he was not speaking in the past tense. All this intrigue was surreal for an Atlanta radio announcer who just a few weeks earlier was playing top 40 records. This turn of events had taken a turn that would be hard to believe by those that worked at the radio station with Jim. The station manager back in Atlanta just shook his head in disbelief when Jim said he was leaving the station without giving a 2-week notice. Jim was beginning to question this escape from Turkey scenario. Things were not adding up, and he had a feeling most of this stuff was being orchestrated, but at this time he did not know why. All this effort did not equal logic, but Jim decided to play along with this production. He knew Carmela did not question any of this because she was in some ways a bystander to it all. Jim was not satisfied with Carmela footing the bill for everything. It's early in the morning and I'm keeping this one real. Jim was not satisfied with Carmela footing the bill for everything, but she made Jim promise her he would not bring up the subject. She would say, "It is just money, and I cannot tell you where the $1 million came from. They both assumed it was from MI7, but at the same time, Jim was beginning to doubt that. Could the money be from the Turks for payment to Jeff because he was able to dismantle the detonator? Mehmet handed Jim and Carmela some clothing like what the Orient Express employees would wear. They went into an adjacent tool shed to discard the Turkish street clothing they had gotten from Frank and Della. As Jim watched his wife Carmela change her clothing, he thought of a conversation he once had about life, courtship, and marriage with a friend at the radio station in Atlanta, and he was referring this to Carmela and how it was almost like an arranged marriage for them. That friend thought the only freedom people could have to start a relationship was to begin it all with arranged marriages. That is, if the two were arranged expertly and not just haphazardly. People who place conditions on courtship, like the false idea you could not be any way other than pure always, placing the male at a disadvantage. How could he approach someone that thought all logical thoughts about love before marriage was bad? He was not talking about physical love. He was talking about the natural human trait to want the opposite sex. That would be the prerequisite for falling in love and marrying. If a man believed this was frowned on as being bad, he would find other objects of affection. That is the reason he determined arranged marriages eliminated that. Marry someone before you have the thoughts and eliminate what people would perceive as wrong. The big problem with this was some people will never be compatible, and if you get stuck with one, you are on a journey to be unhappy. Jim helped Carmela zip up the coveralls, but not before he pinched her on the nose and told her he loved her. She turned and placed Jim's arms around her waist, moving as close to him as was humanly possible. She said, "I love you, Jim, and I am so sorry I got you mixed up in this mess."